Hi everyone, welcome back to Written with Purpose, where I am talking to 10 Black science fiction and fantasy authors about their writing journey, their books, about them in the world and community, and where I engage you in conversation. Our discussion today is going to be with Charlotte Nicole Davis. Charlotte wrote The Good Luck Girls and Sisters of Reckoning. And I remember when I read The Good Luck Girls the first time, and you'll see my review up here somewhere, I was like, what? It was just so interesting. There were road trippy vibes, queer vibes, love vibes, feminist vibes. Like, it was just amazing. And that final scene made me cry. And The Sisters of Reckoning is a continuation of that story. And I really enjoy talking about girls coming together, making moves, and bringing down the patriarchy. So let's get into it. Who is Charlotte Nicole Davis? Charlotte Nicole Davis is the critically acclaimed author of the Good Luck Girls series and loves comic book, movies, and books with maps on the front. A graduate of the New School's Writing for Children MFA program, she currently lives in Brooklyn. And to tell you a little bit more about the Good Luck Girls, the country of Arquetta calls them good luck girls. They know their luck is anything but. Sold to a welcome house as children and branded with cursed markings. Trapped in a life they would never have chosen. When Clementine accidentally kills a man, the girls risk a dangerous escape and harrowing journey to find freedom, justice, and revenge in a country that wants them to have none of those things. Pursued by Arquetta's most vicious and powerful forces, both human and inhuman, their only hope lies in a bedtime story passed from one good luck girl to another, a story that only the youngest or most desperate would ever believe. It's gonna take more than luck for them all to survive. The Good Luck Girls, the concept, amazing, the execution, awesome, and I really enjoyed what Charlotte had to say about the reasons for writing this particular story and why it's so important to have an inclusive group of girls fighting oppression and making it. Enjoy the discussion. Thank you very much for agreeing to spend some time with me to talk about your books and to talk about you and your writing. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, so for me as a booktuber, like when I read books and when I sort of enter into the world that was created by the writer, I find myself wondering, how did we get here? How did we even get into the story, right? Mm-hmm. So when I first read The Good Luck Girls, mm-hmm. I loved it. I continue to love it. But I was really taken by the world, and I had a lot of questions about the person who wrote this book. How did we even get here? How did they even start writing? And so now you're here, and that's where I'd like to start. So how did you start writing? When did you know you wanted to become a writer?
That's a great question. I have always wanted to be a writer. When I was little, I would staple together pieces of scratch paper and draw pictures like I was making my own picture book. And I've been writing, longer form chapter book type stuff since I was maybe 12. So this has just always been something I've wanted to do. Mm-hmm. And wasn't something I really realized that I could do for real until I moved out to New York and just got to meet actual authors, especially authors of color and queer authors. Yeah. And realized that there were people out there doing this who looked like me, and that there was a demand for the kind of stories I really wanted to tell. So sort of on that note, The Good Luck Girls comes from a personal place in that I wanted to do a fantasy set in the part of the world I'm from. So I grew up in Kansas, which is very much, used to be the Old West. I actually went to Dodge City to do some research, and they still have the Main Street and the Boot Hill graveyard and, all the trappings of of what we think of like a Western.
Mhm.
So I was really interested in the idea of doing a fantasy set in that kind of world. And more importantly, a fantasy that Black and queer people got to be the stars of. Because I talk about a lot how most of the time we're relegated to issue books, which I describe as sort of like vegetables, and that they are very important. We need to know our history. We need to know what the struggle is about, how we got here. But it also didn't seem fair to me that we only had vegetables to eat when my white friends had cake. So I was like, I really want to write a book that does acknowledge these issues and digs into the history that I'm basing this off with Westerns, just both as a real historical time period and as a genre that's emerged from it since. But it was also really important to me that this was first and foremost a very fun book, and that readers could go into it without worrying that it was going to be exploitative of their trauma, that it was going to be trying to teach them anything that they already knew. I assume that this reader already knows that oppression exists, and they're not trying to be taught, racism 101 or sexism 101. They want to see people. I have a friend here.
Hi, friend. Who's
This is
that?
Miles, my kitten, my pandemic kitten.
Hi.
But yeah, they want to see people challenging these systems and overcoming and triumphing despite them. So that's really kind of the heart of it. Like I said, I wanted something that felt personal in the setting, and something that felt like something I needed as a young person with, queer people of color,
Mhm.
genre heroes.
And I want to get into that a little bit more, but want to respond to something that you said earlier, Charlotte, around it wasn't until you moved from Kansas then to
Yeah.
New York, and you started to encounter more queer writers, queer people writing, people of color writing.
Mhm.
And how did that happen? Was that in school, or was that in community, or both, or something completely different?
Oh, yeah. So I originally came out here for an internship with Scholastic. And
Cool.
my boss was queer. I was actually with Arthur Levine,
Mhm.
who his imprint did the Harry Potter books,
Mhm.
which is, obviously Harry Potter has since become a much more complicated thing. But at
Yes.
the time, it just was so mind-boggling to me that a queer person was doing the Harry Potter books. I had in my mind that you could not be openly queer and work in children's fiction. I really just thought you would be blacklisted. You would never get to publish anything. I just did not think this was a job I could have. And so to get there and to immediately see that, and to see a lot of other queer people in the industry, people of color, Andrea Pinkney at Scholastic, and just others sort of, at my own level, assistants and interns. And of course, we have a long way to go. I always say this: publishing is still a very predominantly white industry, that is reflected in the books that get promoted. But coming from an even whiter place, an even straighter place, it was just really just life changing for me. And again, that goes to the city as a whole. Just to walk into LaGuardia and see more Black people than I had ever seen in my life. I don't think people understand, if they've grown up with community, what that is like. And so it just really was life changing. I really understood as like, I am not just this freak. I am, I have people, they've been here this whole time. And that there are people who want to read the stories that I can talk about my own stories. I always wrote about white girls, straight white girls. And it's like, I don't have to do that. I can write about people like me. So that was great. And then after, doing that internship, I was like, I want to stay in the city, obviously. So I applied for an MFA program at the New School. They have them specifically for writing for children, and really grateful that I got in. I had a great cohort. Christina Forrest, who also, she was in my year. She also writes fiction about Black teens, and she specifically writes rom-coms, which is another area where, like, if you want some kind of escape, we don't see a whole lot of fluffy romances for Black readers. So she's sort of in that space. And to have people like her, a bunch of my classmates were queer, and it just was so validating just to have that, both so in the city and in my program.
And so what did the good, and we're going to talk about the Sisters of Reckoning,
Mhm.
but I want to, for me, I started reading you with the Good Luck Girls. That was my first introduction to your writing. And so I know nothing about your writing of anybody else. Like in my world, if somebody asked me about you, I would say they center Black queer voices in their writing. So that's my starting point for you. And so how did you like actually depart? Like, was it hard for you to sort of say, you know, now this is a story that I'm going to write and these are the characters that I'm going to center? Or was it more like you were already emancipated because of your surroundings and so it just was?
No, it was definitely, so I guess I should clarify, Good Luck Girls is my first published work, so that makes sense that you have not read my other stuff because it's under my bed. But
Okay.
yeah, it was very much, it felt like I was breaking the law or something. I was like, am I allowed to do this? Like, is anybody going to care? I felt some kind of way. I was like, I don't know how to do this because I hadn't read a whole lot of stuff. We have so much content now that we did not have even like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So I just felt like I didn't know what I was doing. Um, I was kind of apprehensive, thinking that it wasn't going to be, I guess, YA enough. I was like, is this fitting what people think of as YA? Because they have a very specific kind of protagonist in mind and a story in mind. And it's very white and straight centered. So it's just like, this is not necessarily the story I want to tell. And I still feel that, like, even now I realize like, oh, I'm just subconsciously doing things that aren't actually true to the story that I want to tell, just because those are the things that I've been taught or the things that I think people want. And I just have to constantly kind of check myself and be like, oh, you know, this story would have to be much stronger if I let myself do this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I often wonder because I read almost exclusively Black science fiction and fantasy. So so
Mhm.
that's my baseline, it's my world, it's my everything. And I sometimes wonder if writers put extra pressure on themselves just because like there aren't enough stories and these stories are underrepresented in the
Mhm.
literature. So everything that comes out has to be amazing. It has to be
I
amazing.
definitely feel that pressure. It's like I have to represent every Black person ever,
Yeah.
or every, you know, queer woman ever. Um, and that's obviously impossible. So you just have to kind of learn to let that go and be like, I'm just telling my own story, and there will be people who relate to it, and there will be people who don't, and that's also okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about the story. Let's talk about like I often wonder how writers would describe their own works relative to what's on the back of the book and
Uh-huh.
what gets blurbed. So like left to your own devices, how would you describe the plot of The Good Luck Girls and Sisters of Reckoning?
That's a good question. So I have the log line for Good Luck Girls down pretty much, and it just basically goes that a group of girls have to go on the run after one of them's younger sister accidentally kills a man who had it coming. And as they are being chased by lawmen and bounty hunters and other Old West sort of foes, they are also dealing with some supernatural enemies, such as the Raveners, who are these soulless bounty hunters, and the Vengeance, who are these sort of like undead, these ghosts. So it's a mix of all my favorite things. I love action adventure. I love found family. I love horror, and all sort of wrapped up in an Old West package. Sisters of Reckoning, maybe a little trickier to describe because I'm still trying to figure it out,
Yeah.
but basically it takes the original struggle, which was for the girls just to get free of the forces chasing them, um, and it becomes a much larger struggle to take down the system that had them persecuted in the first place. So they are combining forces with other oppressed people in this world, and trying to take down. They have this sort of blacklist of all the robber barons that are running the country, and they're taking them down one by one, and trying to, you know, change things at a, you know, systemic level. So it's fun. I love a good, I don't know, like a blacklist story where, you know, you've got targets that you're taking out one by one. I thought that would be a fun sort of like progression of the kind of action they did in the first book when they were the ones being hunted and now they are the hunters kind of thing. So that's sort of the gist of it. We meet some new characters. A trans girl joins the group. It was really important to me that if I was going to do a girl gang story, that there'd be at least one trans girl in the gang. And they meet a younger brother of a character from the first book who has a lot of connections to some other people. And that really changed the dynamic of the group. There's a lot more romance in this.
There's so many romance questions. We'll get to
yes, a love square, really like a triangle with a dot that doesn't realize they're not in it, but you could call it a square. But yeah, so I had a lot of fun with it. Again, I need to work on my pitch because I'm still trying to kind of figure out how to summarize this book, but it really is a lot more of the same, a lot of action and, you know, hijinks, but definitely a little bit more of edge. There's a little bit more of, you know, these larger issues that they're fighting against, and a little bit more emotional sort of consequences and development that happen.
So when you were as I listened to you describe this story, I have even more questions about like how you developed it and what your inspirations were. But when I was reading it, of course, like readers project themselves into the story, right? Like, so I'm not holding you responsible for any of the connections I made. I completely own them. But I'm really curious about like, what were there other stories or other worlds, perhaps ones that you grew up with, that were inspirations for you, or things that you wanted to kind of trouble, tropes that you wanted to trouble, or anything like that you were building the world?
So I think this is common for most people my age, but definitely Avatar: The Last Airbender. I think when you have a group of friends who are on the run and the dynamics that come out of that, I can for sure see how I was inspired by that. It was one of my favorite things of all time growing up, to this day still, of course.
Nice.
And for more recent stuff, I often describe this as a gender bent Red Dead Redemption 2. So I love video games, and I don't know if you're familiar, but this is a Wild West game, and like you play this bandit and you're in this group of bandits and outlaws and you're just wreaking havoc in the West. And I was like, this is the kind of fantasy that again is mostly reserved for white men, and I would like us to have a turn. So that's kind of the vibe that I was going for with that. I saw you mention in the email, you know, that people often comp it to The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, I see that on the back of those books.
Yeah. Let me get into this for just a second, because
Please.
I definitely see why they comped it to that. I see why booksellers do that, because it is a very shorthand way to tell somebody this is a feminist sci-fi thing. But I really actually don't feel like, to me, this feels like a response to Handmaid's Tale, and that to me, Handmaid's Tale is always read as like, well, what if what has always happened to people of color happened to white people? That's kind of what it feels to me, because like it's just this world where like women's only way of life, you know, their only options are hard labor, housework, or, you know, forced childbirth. And I was like, well, for Black women in America, that was it for 400 years. And
Charlotte.
yeah. And I'm just like, we are treating this like this futuristic, you know, what if? But for Black people, like, this is remember when. So that's why I was like, people often describe this as a dystopia because in their mind, this is something that could happen. But in my mind, this is something that did happen. It's very much inspired by chattel slavery, the following sort of years of, you know, the Black codes and how we had prison labor sort of replacing slavery. And we see the effects of that to this day. And of course, you know, it's intersectional. So queerness and womanhood, that all, and, you know, affects people's experiences with these things. But yeah, in my mind, I was like, please don't think of this as Handmaid's Tale, because in my mind, Handmaid's Tale is thinking about like, oh, we have to prevent something. Where to me, I was like, we have to acknowledge something that happened, and we have to keep it from happening again, for sure. But also just like acknowledge that Black women have been through this, and that our anger is valid. That's what's like, I wanted to kind of deconstruct the angry Black girl trope with Aster. I was like, yes, she's angry, but she should be. She's valid in that, and she deserves to come to a place of happiness and not just be blown off for it. So yeah, it's just, to me, this is definitely more historical fiction than dystopia. This is like me thinking about the past and trying to reclaim it in a way.
You know what, Charlotte? Like, I really appreciate you saying that, because every time, well, to be honest, most times when people reference The Handmaid's Tale in relationship with something that a Black person wrote, I have feelings. Like I'll be honest, like I just, and I was born in a decade, so like The Handmaid's Tale was like it. I remember it before the television show and all of that. Like I read The Handmaid's Tale in my English classes. Margaret Atwood, I read a lot of her books in high school. And so this new reimagining of The Handmaid's Tale in this past decade is my second time entering into that world. And it's been reimagined, because when I first read it, like it was super it was super white, and there were no characters of color, or no characters, at least from what I remember from my first read, there was no understanding of race. It was very much about like white women experiencing trauma and very rigidly organized and orchestrated abuse through patriarchy and through religion. And so it was starker, and it wasn't as vibrant as what we now will see as a result of the way that it's been depicted on screen. So I'm doubly offended by it, because there's no relationship between The Good Luck Girls and The Handmaid's Tale, unless
that makes me that's very validating for me.
Yeah, like and whenever I see it, I just want to use adult words, because it's lazy. Oh my, it's lazy. I'm sorry, it's a lazy comparison.
Yeah.
I will stand behind those words and say it with my whole chest, because if The Good Luck Girls is like The Handmaid's Tale, then that means that any story that has girls who are dealing with who are captured and who have to like break free from that, then any story about that is like The Handmaid's Tale. And instead of saying that The Handmaid's Tale and stories about captive girls have a similar root, right?
Yeah.
Which is patriarchy, which is victimization, which is human trafficking, all of those things. Instead of saying, you could just say that, right? And that's, so for me, I wanted to ask you about that and to get into that, because the other issue is that like your story, the world that you built, is decidedly Black in perspective, even though there's a diversity of of your casts and characters. But it's decidedly queer, which The Handmaid's Tale is not. And also Atwood has views that are problematic. So so yeah, I wanted to get into that, because I wanted us
and the other thing I don't mean to interrupt, but the other thing is that I've had people scared off. They're like, oh, I'm not in a place where I can read The Handmaid's Tale type of stuff. And I'm like, no, this is a swashbuckling romp. Like, this is not supposed to be traumatic in the way The Handmaid's Tale is. I'm not trying to teach you something that you don't already know. Like, this is supposed to be validating and freeing, and like almost like a revenge fantasy. So I'm just like, that also frustrates me when people are just like scared off. I'm like, no, it's not. I was trying specifically not to have that vibe.
And then there was so much joy. There was so much joy in the story, and hope, and even the fact that the stories are told from the perspective of, teenagers. I guess they're late teenagers, early 20s, maybe. So that whole perspective, like who the story is written for, who the story is told by, what are the kinds of foibles that they get themselves into, it's not the same. It's not the same thing. So we can just put Handmaid's Tale aside, having established that there's no relationship and it's a lazy comparison. So let's actually talk about the better work of the two, which is your work.
Well, thank you for that.
And so can we talk about the flowers?
Okay.
I just need to point your attention to the fact that I'm wearing foliage and flowers. I wore I wore this on purpose because when I like got into the world, I was thinking about like the flowers, and I read an arc, so the it's over there, but it had the names of the flowers like on the cover, so it was very obvious that we're talking about flowers. So what is it about flowers? How did you choose the flowers? And also, where did you get the idea for these tattoos? And I feel like I spotted some ink on your arms. So like tell me about how you created that aspect of the houses. And
let's get into it. The idea is that these girls are objectified. They are in these welcome houses, which are essentially brothels, and all the girls at all the welcome houses have names that are sort of objects. So at this particular house, they're flowers, but at other houses, they're like sweets or gemstones, or birds or something like that. And it's just sort of to kind of get at the way that they're dehumanized. As for how I picked the flowers, I get that question a lot, and there really is no good answer. I wanted things that sounded good. So I feel like I liked how Mallow could be shortened to Mal. Violet just really seemed to fit her character. And some of the others are just like, well, I just kind of want to pick flowers that, are just, they sound good on the page. As for the tattoos, I feel like that's something that's in YA a lot, and it almost feels like necessary to have a tattoo setup. But this is a very different, in most situations, it's like a cool thing. Whereas in this, it's very much like something that they feel negatively about. It's a sign of their oppression, of their trauma. And I wanted to get into that because it's the kind of thing that's like, well, you can't ever really erase what's happened to you, but you can learn to be happy anyway. You can learn to grow from it and become, a version of yourself that is no longer defined by it. And that's sort of, I don't want to spoil the ending, but that's sort of reflected in the tattoos by the end. So I just thought it had some good symbolism there, and that, you are literally defined by something, and people can see it, in the same way. So like actual race, actual skin color is not an issue in this world. But for these girls, the fact that they have these tattoos is like an immediate visual, like you are a part of an undercast. So it just was sort of getting into some of those issues, but in a way that felt, I guess, fun. Like I said, somebody always has a tattoo in YA books. So just kind of trying to make it work.
It's like a beautiful brand, like it's a brand, but it is also interesting, and
And I have, my favorite tattoo is this lioness.
It's lovely.
Good angle. So that's probably the ink you saw, but
I only saw it below your sleeve, so I wasn't sure what it actually was, because if you see it now, like it could have been petals or something like that just on the bottom. So, cool. So you said something really interesting, which is that in this world, race isn't as much of a factor. And I have like resistance to that idea. And I'd love to hear more about like that, your decisions around that. What did creating a world like this allow you to explore? And what was your thinking about, sort of figuring out how you would order oppression, and how you decide what oppression, from the intersection experiences of your characters would be on the forefront and what would be pulled back?
So I wanted race to be not a skin color thing, because I didn't want readers to have to face actual anti-Blackness. Pardon me. So again, there's no colorism. Nobody's ever treated poorly because of the color of their skin. Instead, I used a fantasy element. So the undercast are called dust bloods, and they don't have shadows. And that's sort of based on the fact that they're descended from people who were brought over to this country when it was a prison colony. So there's this idea that they have bad blood, they are inherently lesser and inclined to violence. And I really wanted to get into the hypocrisy of that because they are the ones who the violence is being enacted upon. But it's only considered a problem when they retaliate. Whereas the fair bloods who have shadows, they're the ones who are going to these welcome houses and doing the slave labor and otherwise just enforcing violence and profiting off it. And that's never considered violence. It's only considered violence on the dust blood side.
Right.
I use shadows because sometimes it's considered as a metaphor for the soul. So, they're kind of like, oh, these are soulless people. They don't count. They're not real. They have to be controlled and made useful, but otherwise, they're dangerous. So it's kind of what I was going for there. But yeah, like I said, I didn't want to have to deal with the kind of racism that exists in the real world in terms of, anti-Blackness or other, other forms of, I guess, physical based racism that we see. I wanted to make it a fantasy element.
And if I may probe that a little bit more, why not?
Just because, again, I wanted it to be an escape. Okay. I wanted it to be a book that people could have fun with. I didn't want them to have to face stuff they were trying to get away from. And again, it's like I said about the vegetables. I do think that stuff is important. So I'm not saying that it's bad if a book has that and digs into that, but it's not what I had in mind for this particular story.
What that choice allowed me to do was to explore other ways that the characters were experiencing oppression. And so when I read it, I obviously projected my own social location onto the characters, which is I think what every reader does to a certain extent. And it actually reminded me of, and when I was a child, the movie, the girls breaking out movie was the Little Orphan Annie. That was, so when I read this, when I read the breakout scene, it actually reminded me, I think in one of my currently reading videos, I was like, there's something about this that feels like these girls breaking out of the orphanage in Little Orphan Annie when they're tying the sheets together and running away from Miss Hannigan. That's what it felt like to me at the beginning. I mean, obviously much harsher because it wasn't an orphanage, but there was a very girl power, very femme power, very oh my gosh, some of us are comfortable doing this, some of us are not comfortable doing this. And what the risk was, there's this one character that I wasn't sure I could trust, and always thought that she might betray everybody afterwards, right? And some people did better than others in the hierarchy. So that's what it felt like for me. And it also allowed me to think about strength and passion and drive and risk, and risk and betrayal. And it was tense, right? It was, the whole journey was super tense. And I was going to ask you about how you deal with the tension and the trauma for knowing that you're writing for a younger audience. So I think you touched on that a little bit, Charlotte, but I'm wondering if there's anything else you'd like to talk about in terms of how you temper the how harsh the abuse is and how much of it gets on the page as opposed to fades to black.
I think the main thing I wanted to do was focus on the characters and their emotions rather than the trauma itself. So I didn't really want to show anything. Even the prologue, my editors were adamant that we did have that prologue to kind of establish the stakes of the world,
Mm-hmm.
but I wasn't sure we even needed that. And so I guess for context, the prologue is when the little sister is supposed to be doing her first sort of night of work.
Mm-hmm.
And this man is really violent, and she kills him in self-defense, and that's what sets off the whole thing. They have to run away. Um, and so, she kills him before anything really happens, but it's still a very traumatic scene. And I was worried about that. I was like, is this too much? But also wanting to be, I recognize my editor's point of view as like wanting to establish the stakes and recognize that people need to understand what these girls have gone through,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get away from. So we did keep that, but that's the only sexual violence that exists in the series. Everything else is just alluded to, and I deal more with like the character's trauma. Aster has PTSD, and it affects the way she's able to interact with these men, as they're just trying to rob men to support themselves as they're on the run. And she kind of freezes up. She's not used to being in a position of power at all, and it's just very overwhelming for her. So I really wanted to get into more of like the characters after the fact and how they grow from that, and find some measure of balance and freedom and happiness, rather than dwell on the trauma itself, which again, I didn't want readers to have to deal with really too much.
And so what we do get is love, and like love between sisters, chosen
Mhm,
family, found family.
mhm,
We get like sensual love,
mhm,
flirtation, queer
mhm,
love, and so there's so much room for that, for the playfulness, for the desire, for the comfort, for
mhm.
all of those things. And what I really appreciate, and I actually realize this now, is that given the fact that these young women were experiencing the systemic sexual trauma,
Mhm.
we also got to see them experience like love, desire, and connection in a
Yeah,
healthy way in the same story. And that
yeah,
I think was really powerful. Can you talk
it's really
about that?
important to me. Yeah, I really want there to be a good man in the story. So
Mm.
they, they do meet someone along the way, and he just was my attempt to just create really positive masculinity. But what you were mentioning, that is an issue. Like Aster is not at all ready for any level of intimacy yet, and that's something that kind of is explored more in book 2. Like Sisters, like I said, there is much more romance as she's kind of opening up a little bit and becoming more comfortable with herself. But in book 1, it's very much like she is not open to anybody, and she feels very cagey, very mistrustful, and that's reflected in how she interacts with people, and especially men. So she does not trust this other character who I mentioned, even though he is very much meant to be a good guy. But I understand why she's like that. She's just very much like, we just can't trust people.
Mhm.
So that was tough, but I think important to unpack.
How did you feel about writing young adult work that involved queer themes? Do you, was that How did that work
Really
for you?
important to me. I wish book 1 had been even queerer. Book 2 is much queerer. I think with book 1, again, I felt like I said, that pressure is like, let me not stray too far outside the lines. Let me do what
Okay.
is expected of me. Um, and with book 2, I really was like, no, I was like, in my mind, there are 2 straight people in the whole book. In my mind, everybody else is queer, and some of that is like on the page obvious. Some of it's just in my head,
Mhm.
but um, yeah, it's just a world where I just kind of imagine that, and it's in the world itself. It is something that's persecuted, so they do have to be on the DL about it. But again, it's something I did not want to show anybody facing queer phobia of any kind. I
Yeah.
did not want to put that on the page. It's understood, and it's reflected in the characters and how they act with each other, but it's not something that I want readers to have to deal with.
Mhm.
Again, I want it to be a fun book. So yeah, I just really think it's important to have as many representations of queerness as possible. Again, that's why it was important to me to bring in a trans girl for the sequel. I really wanted to show that there's no wrong way to be a woman. That's like sort of the theme to me of book two. Because we have women on the other side. We've got Mallow, who I imagined being like whatever gender I am. She's very trans mask, and maybe not even fully identifies as a woman, but
Mm.
she still belongs in this group.
Yeah.
If she wants to, and she does. But while on the other side, you've got this new character. You've got women who are very like assertive, like Aster, and women who are much more quiet and emotional, like Tansy. So I really wanted to show that however you express yourself, your femininity or masculinity, that's all, you should all feel welcome in this particular gang.
Mm-hmm. I have to say that I really got that
Mm-hmm.
sense, and I really appreciated it because it brought a complexity around gender and identity that
Mm-hmm.
I think is lacking, right,
Mm-hmm.
in YA literature. And YA literature, you're writing for audiences that are in
Mm-hmm.
the process of sort of figuring things out, and
Mm-hmm.
so whatever complexity we can bring to the page will inevitably assist younger readers, I think, in figuring out who they are, or at least receiving some validation, right,
Mm-hmm.
for who they are and how they choose to present themselves at any given moment, recognizing
Mm-hmm.
that that's always going to be sort of dynamic. And I'm wondering, so now we've got the Good Luck Girls, we've got Sisters of Reckoning, and like what's next, right? And I mean that in a very sort of literal sense. So what can we expect after the Sisters of Reckoning, but also in a Charlotte in the World, writing, being introduced to the bookish community
Mm-hmm.
through this particular world. But
Mm-hmm.
what do you dream of giving us in
Um,
the near, medium, and far
that's a
future?
good question. So this series is done. It's a duology. So hopefully readers will feel like all the characters are in a good place at the end. Um, and the next thing I have coming out, I can't talk about, but I do have, I guess I could say a short story in the works that will also be dealing with queerness and blackness, as all my things do. And I guess for things that aren't even real yet, but things that I'm working on my own. I do want to get a little deeper into some of the traumatic stuff that I tried to avoid in this one,
Hmm.
but still very much something that feels, you know, genre, very much fantasy, very much an escape in a certain way. Maybe it does dig a little deeper into some of these issues, but without being, it's still having the distance of fantasy.
Right.
So we'll see. I mean, hopefully things um, work out. But yeah, just really enjoying getting to talk to readers. It's really a privilege to talk to young readers. They're so passionate and perceptive. They notice everything. Um,
Yes.
yeah, good and bad.
Uh-huh.
Um, so I am really hoping we get to do in-person events again because I missed that probably the most.
Mhm.
But yeah, really just honored to be a part of this community in any capacity and hoping to continue to do so.
And where are you in community? Like what kinds of communities, like in terms of your writing, and maybe even your reading, what communities are you a part of? Where do you find communion when you're not
I
writing?
used to be super active on Twitter, and for my
Yeah.
mental health, I have stepped away. And I'm trying to transition to Instagram. So maybe you'll find me on Instagram. I don't know, but I'm like such a private person.
Mm,
Instagram feels a little more inaccessible to me. So I'm like, I don't really want you to see what I'm doing. I just want to be a hermit. But um, I'll find a way. I'll post pictures of the cat or something. I don't know. But because I do want to stay connected with people. So it's a work in progress. But in terms of the wider book world, yeah, it's definitely trying to find my place in social media. Um, in terms of my own community, I am still really close with all my um, MFA buddies and some other people I've met from my debut year. It's very much like a high school class. Everybody is kind of going through the same thing at the same time. So, you get to know people. So, I'm fortunate to have found a circle of people who I can talk to about this stuff. And yeah, just trying to make it work.
Um, you already said that you're a pretty private person, and it sounds
Mhm,
like usually toward the twilight of our interviews, I usually ask if people are interested in learning more about your work or wanting
mhm,
to connect with you,
mhm,
as junior writers or
mhm,
as fans of your work.
mhm.
What would you recommend? And I think I know what your answer would be, would be, but
Well, I love to hear from actual readers.
okay,
So that is totally. I have a contact form on my website.
great.
You can reach out. That'd be great. Again, I can't promise. I have um, left Twitter in the dead of the night. I can't promise I will see those DMs. Um, but yeah, for sure the contact form.
Cool.
So yeah.
Well, is there any other information or anything else you want to share that we haven't covered in our conversation so far? Sometimes things come up and I might not ask. So, is there anything
Um,
that you'd like to
I
share
guess
with
the
Booktube?
question I get asked a lot is which one of the characters is my favorite.
Hmm.
Um, and to which I say the one I think I would get along the most with is Mallow for sure.
Mm-hmm.
As I mentioned, I feel like I kind of based her gender expression off my own,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we would really connect a lot on that. And just I like how she kind of deals with stuff with humor and is kind of scrappy. So I think she would be my best friend out of the group. But in terms of the character that was the most fun to write, I always say Violet because she is very complex, um, problematic in ways
Yeah.
that have to be untangled. And it's kind of like, I describe her as the Malfoy of the group. She's a little more privileged than the rest because
Mm-hmm.
she is a fair blood, um, just sort of like a parallel for the white population in our actual history. And I did make her actually white, sort of to reflect that. But she has some learning to do. But I didn't want it to come at the expense of the other characters, emotional
Mm-hmm.
journeys. So it was just really interesting to write her and just kind of fun to write a character who's kind of like selfish. That's just like so, you know, different from what we usually write. So it's just kind of like this is just interesting in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed writing her. But yeah, they all have something I guess that I relate to in them. So hopefully that's other readers find something to relate to themselves.
I always found it interesting to hear, what was the easiest scene to write, what was the hardest
Mhm.
scene to write, in either of the books, and
Yeah.
why.
Um, Easiest, I'm not sure. Nothing felt easy.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. The hardest scene was for sure there's a bank robbery and the logistics of it and making sure everybody had a moment and that the emotions were right, that they felt frightened enough, but also like it felt exciting enough. Um, and just getting all those balances right. That was really tough. But I had a lot of fun with it by the time it was done.
It was excellently done.
Okay, I'm glad you think so. Because I was
Yeah.
like,
My
this
heart
is
was pounding.
But maybe the easiest scene, I really like the scenes where they're just like sitting around the campfire talking to each other. Uh,
Yeah.
so I really like the quieter character moments for sure.
Yeah, I loved the horse. Like I loved I could hear like horses and carriages and,
Hmm.
and like
Hmm.
underbrush and wind and I just
Yeah.
loved that. And in
Uh-huh.
book 1, I I cried when like the reveal, like the place that they were all trying to get to when they
Hmm.
got there, and when like there was a reveal as to like what it actually was versus
Hmm.
what they thought it was. I
Hmm.
like just started bawling, and Yeah, I'm not going to spoil it for anybody who hasn't read it yet, but
Yeah.
yeah. Because a lot of people will not read book one. If they know that it's a duology or that there's going to be a sequel, they'll just wait to read both together. So
Yeah.
yeah, but that was really awesome reveal. Well, I just want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for
Yeah.
talking about your books, talking about yourself, which I really
Yeah.
appreciate. And thank you for building this world. It was a lot of fun, and I have a better understanding now about your choices as to
Hmm.
like what you wanted to hit the page and what you wanted to sort of be a part of the background, and the choices
Hmm.
that you made sort of allowed this to be, a thrilling, on the run, adventure, which
Hmm.
is what I needed, with a lot of like, you know, solidarity and
Hmm.
connection, which I think in this historical moment we need in our YA. Right?
Hmm.
We need more of that in our YA. So thank you so much.
Hmm. Well, thank you for having me. It was a great interview. Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed my chat with Charlotte Nicole Davis, and I'd love to just hear if you've read one or both of the books, what you thought of them. Make sure that you include those comments in the comments below. A couple of reflections I have. Number one is the importance of feminist science fiction and fantasy. So much of SFF, so much of SFF is super misogynist, and there's so much misogynoir in Black SFF, and that's a real problem unless you're actually reading works that are anti-patriarchal like this one is. And I really love what Charlotte had to say about the Good Luck Girls and Sisters of Reckoning in relationship with A Handmaid's Tale, which is a lazy comparison, frankly, as I said, and I will stand by it. I also enjoyed what Charlotte had to say about like who gets to be the girls in the girl group, right? And it's really important for them to be non-binary, for them to be trans girls, and for our notion of girlhood and power to be queered, to be inclusive, and to be one that all girls, all people who identify as girls can find themselves in, especially when they're of color, especially when they're Black. So I really appreciated the discussion, and I love the use of the word swashbuckling, which needs to be a part of my everyday. Let's choose a card. All right, the quote is from Octavia E. Butler in Parable of the Sower. You are earthseed. You are earth seeds, one of many, one unique, one small seed, one great promise, tenacious of life, shaper of God, water, fire, sculptor, clay. You are earth seed, and your destiny, the destiny of earth seed, is to take root among the stars. And the prompt is write a love note to your community. Now, you don't have to write a whole love note. You can just write one positive sentence that sort of describes what you want to say to your people, to your community. Now, how does this connect with the story and our discussion? I think it does in a number of different ways. I think this idea of being a part of community, which was Earthseed in Parable of the Sower, is really important, but also following what you think your destiny is. And in the first book of the duology, in the first book, the girls believed in this like fantastical story, and they tried to get there. And I feel like this idea of your destiny being among the stars, Octavia E. Butler wanted to use that because in the story, Lauren Olamina was like, I might not ever go to Mars, but if my hopes are oriented away from this earth, it will keep me in a forward momentum. And I think that momentum is definitely a word that describes the journey of the girls in the Good Luck Girls. And I think there is a connection here. So yes, write a love note to your community, put it in the comments, and do 3 other things, so 4 in total, in order to have your name entered into this particular draw for Melanin Eclectic 2022 Planner. The 4 things are: like this video, subscribe to this channel, share this video, and then include a comment that is prompted by this particular prompt, and then your name will be entered into a draw. I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I want to if you were part of a gang of girls trying to survive and make it to some kind of promised land, what would your avatar be? And if you got to choose your own tattoo of power, what would it be? I have so many questions. I just loved the vitesse, the speed, and the hope that was all wrapped up in this story. Anyway, I can talk about this book for a long time. I will not remember to read with purpose, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.